Welcome, everybody. We're having our public outreach meeting for the update of the Hazard Mitigation Plan. The draft plan is on our website and is available for public comment. And Mr. Pierre is from Horsley Witten. He's our lead consultant working through a grant that we have from the state to do our update. And we're very pleased that Craig could join us remotely to go over the plan and answer any questions folks might have. So we look forward to the presentation. Thank you, Craig, for being here.
Great, thanks, Val. So welcome everybody. My name is Craig Ferrer. I'm the project manager for the Hazard Mitigation Plan update for the Town of Kingston. I am a senior planner with the Horsley Witten Group. We've been working just over a year with the town to develop an update to the 2015 plan. I just wanted to let folks know that the 2015 plan was part of a regional plan, and this 2022 update is actually going to be a standalone document for the Town of Kingston. So this is the first standalone document that they'll be working with. And so welcome, and we'll have time at the end for a question and answers. I do want to ask if is there anybody online, Val?
Just checked, and I didn't see anyone.
Okay, we just need to monitor that just so that we can generate that attendance list. And if we could get the folks to give their names before they leave so that we can have that attendance sheet, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to turn off my video. So again, this is the 2022 update of the 2015 Hazard Mitigation Plan. A Hazard Mitigation Plan has a planning horizon of 5 years. So the town's Hazard Mitigation Plan is currently out of date right now. With this update, we will get the town back in compliance so that they can be eligible for federal funding. So the work that we've done dates back till 2015 as far as our research and our data collection. And again, once this plan goes to MEMA and FEMA and gets approved, it will be good for 5 years. So this is the local hazard mitigation committee for the Town of Kingston. It's essentially all department heads. We also have some folks from some committees. We have Ryan Earl from Eversource. And then we also had 2 folks from the Old Colony Planning Council. They are the regional planning agency that developed the 2015 your existing hazard mitigation plan. And this is the group that I met with. I think we had maybe 4 planning team meetings and then just had coordination throughout this past year on developing the hazard mitigation plan update. So why hazard mitigation planning? The Hazard Mitigation Act of 2000 requires that all communities have an approved hazard mitigation plan in place in order to be eligible for federal funding. FEMA defines hazard mitigation planning as the reduction or elimination of long-term risk to life, property, and the environment. So our mission statement, the existing plan did not have a mission statement associated with it. So the local hazard mitigation committee that I just showed you, those folks, in one of our meetings, we developed this mission statement. So the purpose of the Kingston Hazard Mitigation Plan is to preserve the quality of life, property values, natural, historic, and cultural resources by mitigating existing and projected future natural hazards impacting the community to enable the town to realize a sustainable, resilient future for Kingston. And the mitigation process that we went through has 4 primary components: assessing risks, establishing goals, identifying projects and actions, and updating and maintaining the plan. So starting out with the assessing risks, we are required by MEMA and FEMA to evaluate all of the hazards that the state of Massachusetts hazard mitigation plan addresses. And if they are not applicable, we need to just state that as such in the plan. What we did was we looked at all of the events across the different types of hazards that have happened since 2015. We looked at the frequency and the severity of those. Then we took various data sets, critical facilities, the parcel data set, and we did a series of overlays to see what's at risk and when it might be at risk. And then we also developed vulnerability assessment and an economic vulnerability assessment, and I'll get to those in a little bit in the next couple of slides. The next piece was to establish goals. So the goals are really intended to be overarching and broad brush. What the town of Kingston hopes to accomplish over the next 5 years through this hazard mitigation plan. The details and the specifics really come into play in the mitigation action strategy, which is actually the focus of this presentation tonight. And I'll get to that in a few. And then identifying those projects and actions. And then we have to also identify and set the schedule for updating and maintaining the plan. We don't want to go through this process every 5 years and just have the plan sit on the shelf. We want it to be a living document. We want it to stay relevant, and we want people in town to utilize this document so that they can mitigate some of these vulnerabilities that we've identified. So as far as the hazards that we've gone through, we have these various categories: flood-related, winter-related, wind-related, geologic-related, drought-related, extreme heat, urban fire and wildfire, and invasive species. As far as climate change, because it's such a pressing issue with both indirect and direct impacts on a range of the different types of hazards and how they actually interact with those different hazards, we included a climate change impact section under each of these different types of hazards. So there's not a standalone chapter that addresses climate change. Climate change is addressed throughout the entire plan. So our outreach and coordination to date, we have a project webpage hosted on the town's website on the planning, under the planning department's page. We have posted our notices there. We have our previous public workshop presentation there. When we had our community survey open, we had the link posted there. It's really just intended to be a repository of information. So if folks can't come to our workshops or our meetings, then they can get that information and get informed. And my contact information is also there, so folks can reach out to me individually. So we had 4 local hazard mitigation committee meetings, May of last year, December, and then May 16th and May 31st of this year. We had our first public workshop on April 11th, and we had our online community survey open for, I think, maybe just under 2 months, and we had about 58 responses. So this is our risk assessment, and these are, as you can see, these are all the different categories, and then these are the specific hazards that we addressed within those different categories. So essentially what we did was we looked at NOAA has a severe events database that they maintain, and they have, for most hazards, they have data relative to the dates that these events happened, where they happened, whether it was Kingston specific or if it was regional or statewide. And then they also identify the severity. So they identify the economic impacts, if there were any injuries or deaths, if there were transportation disruptions and things like that. And then the column on the right is the hazard index. So it goes from a low of 1 to a high of 10. And as you can see, the top 4 hazards impacting the community based on NOAA's severe events database, as well as confirmation from the local hazard mitigation committee. We have blizzards, snow and nor'easters at the top at number 8 under winter related hazards. And then hurricanes, inland urban flooding and heavy rain, coastal flooding and coastal erosion and shoreline change at number 7. So those are the top 4 hazards that are impacting the community right now. And those, the draft plan is available for public comment right now on that project webpage, and you'll kind of see that kind of play out in the plan, but you'll also see it play out in the mitigation actions that we've identified in a little bit with this presentation. So part of the vulnerability analysis is also to look at and develop an economic vulnerability analysis. So this is just a sample of some of the mappings that we did, and all of the maps are included in the draft plan that's available online. So the top left is the FEMA flood hazard zones, the 100-year, 500-year, and the VE or velocity zone. Down in the middle, in the center of the page, are the sea, lake, and overland surge, hurricane inundation zones. And then on the top right, we have the sea level rise, various scenarios. So we mapped sea level rise impacts, projected sea level rise impacts for 1, 3, 5, and 7 foot. However, we only evaluated impacts for 1 to 3 feet, just based on the planning horizon of a hazard mitigation plan, which again is a 5-year planning horizon. So essentially what we did with these 3 different data sets is that we took the parcels data layer, we merged that with the assessor's CAMA data, which has all of the economic features for each of the parcels. And we overlaid all 3 of these with the FEMA flood zone, with the sea, lake, and overland surge for hurricane inundation and for sea level rise, with the parcels. And then we also have a critical facilities data set that we developed to identify which critical facilities might be impacted by the current vulnerabilities of the FEMA flood zone, but then based on, and then the sea, lake, and overland surge, hurricane inundation, and then also based on those sea level rise projections. So you can see on the 2 to the right, critical facilities are the yellow circles that are numbered, and the vulnerable populations are the orange. We actually have a separate table in the hazard mitigation plan draft that identifies which ones those are. And then we've also broken, this is a composite map, 11 by 17, but we also broke these maps down into quadrants and blew them up a little bit so that you can see what the different vulnerable populations or critical facilities that are impacted. In addition to these, from the vulnerability analysis, we also developed a historic hurricane map, average annual snow, and tornadoes and earthquakes. And those are also located in the hazard mitigation plan draft. Also part of the economic vulnerability analysis, we, as I said, we took those projected scenarios, those data layers in GIS, which is a geographic information system. We overlaid them with the parcels data layer. We also overlaid them with the critical facilities and vulnerable populations. So looking at the table 220 on the left-hand side, it's the National Flood Insurance Program insured properties. And that shows how many policies are in place right now, what the coverage value is, and it's just over 16, almost $17 million. How many policies are in the A zone and the X zone, and then what the losses that have been paid. And that's over time. Since the 2015 plan, there have been 6 flood loss claims that have been paid, with a total of $236,000 that have been paid out. The tables on the right, table 221, total vulnerability. These are just examples of some of the data that we've worked with, that we've developed. The 100-year flood zone, the sea level rise, 1-foot scenario, and then the total vulnerability, hurricane category 1. So this just shows some of those overlays that we performed on that mapping, and then we exported a table out to show what parcels are impacted, and then what the total values were. So the total value for, as an example, for table 221 for the FEMA 100-year flood zone is just at $2.5 billion. Table 224, sea level rise, 1-foot scenario projection is just over $77 million of potential impact. And then the table 226, vulnerability from hurricane category 1 of the sea, lake, and overland surge is just over $108 million. So essentially we're technically not required yet. Next year by 2023, communities are going to be required to take climate change impacts into consideration, but this is our standard process that I use all the time with communities, especially coastal communities who may be experiencing climate change impacts a little bit more accelerated than other communities. So there is a vulnerability assessment section in the hazard mitigation plan that has all the totals for all the different types of scenarios, as well as all of the parcels and which ones are, which by land use type, which ones are affected. We also looked at social vulnerability, drinking water systems, wastewater systems, transportation systems, and then looked at evacuation and population at risk. So just some notes on the water system. There is a new manganese removal plant coming online this summer. It'll serve 2 additional wells, Grassy Hole and 186 well. There is a wastewater treatment plant expansion happening with 2 additional tanks being added, activating the leach field, as well as updating the comprehensive wastewater management plan. You'll see in a little bit also that some of the pump stations for the wastewater system treatment system are located in the slosh zones. So we've included a hazard mitigation action to address that. And then we just also looked at the capacity of the regional shelter, Silver Lake Regional High School. Their capacity is approximately 420 people. It's relatively a full service shelter. And we did that just because we wanted to make sure that there's enough capacity in the community, and should there be a need for additional capacity, we could have put that into a hazard mitigation action so that the town could move forward in trying to evaluate that. We also looked at environmental vulnerabilities, direct impacts, loss of habitat, salinization of surface and groundwater, indirect impacts, inland damage to the built environment, whether it's critical infrastructure, residential areas, commercial buildings, roads, bridges, threats to ecosystems and species, and then just potential contamination for potable water. And then we looked at the capability assessment. There are 3 different sections of the capability assessment. There's the planning and regulatory. So the capability assessment essentially looks at the town's existing plans, studies, and reports, and their existing capacities and what they can take on now and what they've been working on. And the capability assessment section is really critical to the hazard mitigation plan, because we've evaluated all of the town's existing plans, studies, and reports. And wherever there is a goal, action, or objective that addresses hazard mitigation or natural hazards, we've documented that in the plan, and we've carried those goals, actions, or objectives into the hazard mitigation plan mitigation strategy. And it's important in the sense that we have to make sure that we review everything that the town has done, so that there's consistency across all of the municipal documents for the community. And you'll see in a little bit when I start to go through the mitigation strategy, we identified where these actions come from, and some of them, a lot of them come from multiple documents, not just our process here tonight. But as long as we do that and we show that all of these actions have been vetted across multiple audiences, multiple demographics, should there be a funding opportunity in front of the town and the town decides to pursue federal funds to mitigate some of these vulnerabilities, the more that we can show that all of this information has been vetted across and is consistent with all of your other municipal documents, the more teeth the town's application will have in getting those funds. So for planning and regulatory, we looked at the 2017 master plan, the open space, and these are just some examples. The open space and recreation plan from 2015, the Grays Beach stabilization project from 2020, and then the landing resilience master plan. Under administrative and technical, that just really deals with the day-to-day protocols or standard operating procedures of the community. So we looked at your emergency management plan, the town's website, and we also looked at the municipal vulnerability preparedness program project from 2019, which is, most folks call it an MVP program. The town completed that process through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in 2019. And essentially that MVP program and process is an abbreviated sort of one-day hazard mitigation plan. So we made sure that we incorporated all of those actions into the HMP, hazard mitigation plan strategy as well. And once the plan gets MEMA and FEMA approval, having brought all those actions in from the MVP report, now provides the town with 2 opportunities for a funding mechanism. There are MVP action grants. Now that the town is a certified MVP community, having completed that process, the town can seek funds through the MVP program. I think maybe twice a year, It's definitely once a year and depends on the available funds. It might come around for a second round. But now, once we have the plan in place and approved, we'll be able to not only use MVP funds for potential funding mechanisms, but we'll also be able to use HMP funds as well. And then the financial just identifies the different types of grant programs that are out there that the community can tap into to seek submit a grant application for funds to mitigate some of these vulnerabilities. Next is the goals, and your 2015 plan did not have goals associated, so our committee developed these. Goal 1 is to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. Number 2 is to reduce property damages caused by natural hazard impacts. Number 3 is minimize social distress and economic losses and business disruptions. Number 4 is to provide an ongoing forum for the education and awareness of natural hazard mitigation issues, programs, policies, projects, and resources. And number 5 is adapt to and mitigate for the existing and projected impacts of climate change towards a sustainable, resilient community. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the goals are intended to be broad brush and overarching. The details and the specifics really come into play in the mitigation action strategy, which I'll get to shortly. So the mitigation strategy, the actions that we developed for consideration in the mitigation strategy come from a number of different areas. So the first is carryover from the 2015 plan. So part of the hazard mitigation planning requirement of FEMA is that we go through the existing plan, we identify, we look at the mitigation action strategy, and we identify what actions were completed, when they were completed, who the responsible party was, and what the funding mechanism was. And then we also identify what was not completed. And if it's still relevant, we're required to carry that forward into this update as well. So the town may not have gotten to it since 2015, but if it wasn't accomplished and it's still relevant, it's back in this update now. So the town has the next 5 years to work on that. The next piece is the MVP report. As I mentioned, it's critical that we carry over all of the actions that were identified from the MVP process in 2019. That enables the town to have 2 different funding mechanisms or funding streams to apply for funds for. We have the local hazard mitigation committee coordination. So that team that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, in between our meetings and our public workshop and all of our different coordination back and forth, folks came up with some suggestions as well, just based on the role that they play, the office that they work in, or their responsible area or topic. Various plans, studies, and reports. So again, that capability assessment section that I just mentioned, some of those other plans have actions or objectives or goals that are targeted towards hazard mitigation or natural hazards, and we brought those over as well. And then just from myself, the Horsley Witten group, from our experience working with other communities, we also brought some mitigation actions to the table. So categories for mitigation actions. It's really important that we develop these mitigation actions and develop a strategy, and we put them into these 6 different categories: planning and prevention, property protection, natural resource protection, structural projects, emergency services, and public education and awareness. And we do this because, again, we want to make sure that the hazard mitigation plan is a user-friendly living document that people are going to be able to access, be able to utilize, and be able to navigate really easily. So we've kind of portioned all of the mitigation actions under these 6 different topic or different categories. Part of the hazard mitigation strategy process is to prioritize actions, and this is considered an abbreviated cost-benefit analysis. We utilized FEMA's STAPLEE method, so we had to take all of the actions that we were considering. We had to look at the goals and we had to look at the costs and the benefits of each action across these 7 different categories. So social, is the action socially acceptable? Technical, is the action technically feasible and provide appropriate levels of protection? Administrative, does the town have the capability to complete the action? Political, will the town support or oppose the project? Legal, does the town have the legal authority to complete the action? Economic, is the action cost effective? And environmental, will the action affect the natural environment? So I mentioned that this is an abbreviated cost benefit analysis. Once the town has an approved hazard mitigation plan in place from FEMA, and there is money available, there's a federally declared disaster, either for the state or for the region or for the town, and the town wants to pursue submitting a grant application to fund one of the strategies, it's going to be a full-blown cost benefit analysis, which is extremely time intense, and it's a paper trail, and the towns and cities and towns really need to be working on developing those projects as early on as possible. It requires photo documentation, damage, loss claims, and estimates. So it's a requirement that we go through this process. Again, this is just an abbreviated cost benefit analysis, so it wasn't such an arduous task at this point, but once the town has a plan in place and they do seek grant funds, it's going to be a full-blown cost benefit analysis. And the state and FEMA do provide technical assistance to communities to help them develop their cost benefit analysis. We also had to assign timeframes and cost ranges to the mitigation actions as a requirement. So timeframes, again, based on the planning horizon of a 5-year term for a hazard mitigation plan. Short term is 0 to 6 months, medium term is 6 to 18 months, and long term would be 18 to 5 years. Cost ranges, staff time, so municipal personnel time. This is part of the protocol of standard operating procedures of the various departments in town. Minimal cost would be under 5,000, moderate would be 5,000 to 25,000, and significant is over 25,000. So this is the mitigation strategy for the 2022 update. Again, we have them portioned out into the different categories. So this is public education and awareness, action number 1, and each action has that red font. That tells you where the actions come from. So action 1 comes from the MVP report in 2019, as well as the 2022 vulnerability assessment. So this plan update process. So develop a preparedness campaign for the general public and private sector that includes guidance, checklists, and recommendations to increase community awareness of and resilience to natural hazards and climate change impacts. So the specific tasks are develop and distribute an informational natural hazards pamphlet, distribute a tourist evacuation and shelter information, and develop and distribute information on which roads and bridges are subject to periodic flooding. The next action number 2, came from the 2022 Local Hazard Mitigation Committee, this process. And we're under property protection now, which is a separate category. Coordinate with the city of Brockton to better understand the integrity of Forge Pond Dam. Forge Pond Dam is a low hazard dam, but we were unable to get any information on low hazard dams in general. They have a timetable of when they have to have a phase 1 inspection report done. And that phase 1 inspection report is really critical because it identifies the short and long range actions for improvements that should be happening. Because the city of Brockton owns the dam, the town needs to have a coordination session with them to hopefully understand, where the dam is at, what the condition of the dam is in, so that they can better understand what might need to happen. Not having control over it makes it a little bit difficult, but the town can certainly stay on top of the city of Brockton and, try to, if there were anything that was significant, try to either assist or maybe force their hand a little bit. Action number 3, also from the 2022 Local Hazard Mitigation Committee, coordinate with private dam owners to better understand the integrity of the following dams. Foundry Pond Dam is a significant hazard. Russell Pond Dam is a high hazard, and Sealand Reservoir Dam is also a significant hazard. So again, these are privately owned structures that the town was unable to get any information on. So we put this action in there so that the town can then work with these private dam owners to either get a copy of the most recent phase 1 inspection report or provide some technical assistance on where and how to get that phase 1 inspection report done, so that there aren't any breaches of the dam and there aren't any vulnerabilities associated with that. So flooding in the inundation zone, and significant and high hazard dams also are required to have emergency action plans developed for them, and we weren't able to locate those either. So again, it's a little challenging because the town doesn't necessarily have the authority over it, but we need to bring it up so that want to have it like on the books, so that just in case there is a funding mechanism, the town can reach out to these private dam owners and again potentially provide some technical assistance in how they can get these different types of required documents completed. Action 4, we're still under the property protection, comes from the MVP project or process in 2019. Conduct a vulnerability assessment of coastal neighborhoods to prepare for and identify ways to mitigate projected climate change impacts. Action 5 comes from the Plymouth Hazard Mitigation Plan. I actually wrote that plan for the town of Plymouth, which was approved in December 2021. Part of our capability assessment is also to review the hazard mitigation plans of surrounding communities as well. And also, because we're in the public comment period right now for this plan, I reached out to all the adjacent communities and let them know that the town of Kingston's plan is available for public comment right now. We've actually already got comments back from the town of Plymouth. So conduct a feasibility study on the Duxbury, Kingston, Plymouth Harbor for a more collaborative approach to shoreline protection. Sometimes partnerships with other communities is difficult. Sometimes it's to the community's advantage to have a regional approach. So just for consistency purposes, we wanted to make sure that we brought this action in. Action number 6, that we're under the natural resource protection category now. This comes from the MVP reports, the Open Space and Recreation Plan update from 2015. To develop and implement a comprehensive tree management strategy or forest stewardship plan that utilizes a public-private partnership to identify priority trees for management and maintenance to increase the resiliency of the electrical system and to maintain fire roads and open space lands. Action number 7, again, still under property protection, comes from the MVP report from 2019. Develop a comprehensive strategy to promote drinking water supply conservation through a public education campaign, planning, investment, and development. Action number 8 comes from the Kingston Master Plan and the Plymouth Carver Sole Source Aquifer Action Plan. Coordinate with other Plymouth Carver Sole Source Aquifer communities to act immediately to permanently protect undeveloped lands that perform critical ecosystem services of groundwater recharge and infiltration. And action number 9 comes from the Jones River Landing Maritime Resilience Plan. The town will support the Jones River Watershed Association regarding their grant application to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for restoring the coastal bank and creating a tidal marsh habitat in the Jones River estuary. And that application by the Jones River Watershed Association was recently submitted. And they have grant funding. They are trying to acquire additional funds. So now we're under structural projects. Action number 10 comes from the 2015 plan. So this is a carryover from your existing plan that was not accomplished. But it also comes from it's confirmed by the 2022 vulnerability assessment. Develop and implement a local flood mitigation dam management program, including inspecting, maintaining, and upgrading the following dams for present functions, as well as stormwater management potential: Russell Pond Dam and Foundry Pond Dam. Action 11 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment. So this HMP update process to complete recommended improvements for town-owned dams based on the most recent phase 1 inspection reports. So as I mentioned, that those phase 1 inspection reports identify the overall condition of the dam, but then they also include both short and long-term recommendations for improvements that should be happening. And this is for the Reed Mill Pond Dam and the Kelleher Dam. The Kelleher Dam just got submitted back to the town, their most recent phase 1. So both of those structures have both short and long-term strategies, which are identified in the hazard mitigation plan draft that's online, that the town needs to pursue making some of these improvements. Action number 12 comes from the 2015 plan. So again, it's a carryover. It was not completed since 2015, but is still relevant. Also is confirmed by the 2022 vulnerability assessment to dredge the Jones River as needed to remove the natural buildup of silt and sand that accumulates over time. Still under structural projects, action number 13 comes from the MVP report, was confirmed by the 2022 vulnerability assessment, and also was referenced in the open space and recreation plan from 2015, improved drainage infrastructure and capacity. So the specific tasks are evaluate the stormwater management plan and identify and implement projects such as increased catch basin maintenance, culvert replacement, or outfall retrofits to reduce flooding in town. Conduct a town-wide evaluation and prioritize improvements for drainage and capacity. Minimize flooding on evacuation routes and roadways, parking lots, and increase overall drainage capacity town-wide. Evaluate the feasibility of retrofits and replacements utilizing low-impact development, green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. And to repurpose town-owned land for stormwater storage and treatment. Action number 14 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment to protect sewer infrastructure. And essentially this just addresses the sewer pump stations. There are a number of pump stations identified on the mapping as well as in the content or the text of the hazard mitigation plan draft that fall within the various sea, lake, and overland surge for hurricane inundation zones. So categories 1 through 4 hurricanes that the town should look at and consider some floodproofing improvements for those structures. Now we're into emergency services category. Action number 15 comes from the MVP report as well as the 2022 vulnerability assessment. Review and update the emergency shelter plan to incorporate extreme heat events and determine if alternate shelters are necessary. Also to create a heat emergency action plan. You'll see in the hazard profile section of the hazard mitigation plan that under the extreme heat section, we are expected to have more days over 90 degrees, longer periods of droughts, longer periods of heat waves. So a heat emergency action plan is a fairly critical piece. Action number 16 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment. Update the town's comprehensive emergency plan management plan. So the town has already been proactive with that, and I believe they have an intern coming in for the summer to help to update that. We just thought that it was important to include in this plan. Should we get FEMA approval before the plan becomes updated, and if there's a funding mechanism available, then we can help offset the cost of that. Action 17, now we're under planning and prevention category, comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment. Develop a comprehensive town-wide climate action plan that balances both mitigation and adaptation. And it used to be that we were only looking at mitigating the impacts of natural hazards, but more and more communities and federal agencies are starting to use the word adaptation as well. So a climate action plan that balances both mitigation and adaptation, that's town-wide and not necessarily coastal specific or site specific, is to the benefit of the community. Action number 18 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment. Prepare an after the storm recovery plan for the community. If the town has a recovery plan in place, you can accelerate recovery faster. People can get back, business owners can get into their sites and evaluate their damages and get their improvements made. People can get back to work. Tax base can get back to business as usual. So an after the storm recovery plan for the community is a pretty important document. Action number 19 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessment, as well as FEMA's planning for drought resistance research. So develop a drought management plan in advance of the crisis stage for chronic drought. As I mentioned, we will be experiencing increased periods of long-term drought, as well as periods of extreme heat. So the plan should consider a reevaluation of all the zoning bylaws and land use regulations in support of drought resilience. So looking at landscape ordinances that dictate conserving, recycling potable water and the use of drought tolerant plant species to help reduce water demand. Looking at stormwater management plans that support a comprehensive approach to collecting, treating, and even reusing water to help mitigate drought. And then also looking at capital improvement plans that emphasize investment in water systems that prevent loss of water during transmission. And action 20 comes from the 2022 vulnerability assessments. Coordinate with MBTA's Risk Council to better understand improvements necessary to ensure consistent, reliable service in light of impacts from natural hazards and climate change scenario projections. So if you look at the maps that are included in the plan, you'll see that the MBT rail falls within several of the different, it falls within the FEMA flood hazard zones, but it also is impacted by the various climate change projected scenarios that we looked at. So this just sets the stage for coordination between the town and MBTA to look at that for any types of mitigation actions that can happen to ensure consistency and use with that rail system. Our project webpage is still up and running. The draft update is available. This is the location where you can access a copy of the full draft hazard mitigation plan. Our public comment period is open until June 17th, so the end of this week. My contact information is on that project webpage as well. Comments should come directly to myself. And when we do get comments in, I will bring those comments back to the local hazard mitigation committee. And we will have a discussion about what we want to incorporate, what we want to revise. And we will put together a revised final draft that will be submitted to MEMA. This is Valerie, the town planner, her contact information, and this is my contact information. Again, we're both listed on that project webpage. If you want to email me or you want to call, that's fine as well. That's my cell phone number there because I intermittently still work remote. And that pretty much does it for the presentation. I am going to turn my camera back on. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Nathan Hedberg, Post Court. I
Yes.
wanted to ask about the Foundry Pond Dam and what kind of hazard that presents.
Okay, just let me pull, I have the plan. So Foundry Pond Dam. So this is one of the ones that the last phase 1 inspection is unknown. It's a significant hazard. So actually the most, we don't know what the hazards are because it is privately owned. And that's why we have one of the mitigation action strategies in there, that we want the town to coordinate with the private dam owner to get a copy of that most recent phase 1 inspection report so that we can identify what those different hazards are. So
Okay.
The town not owning the structure makes it, like I said earlier, it makes it a little challenging because we don't really have jurisdiction over it. The town can't really force the private dam owner to do what they're supposed to do. But we can certainly reach out and we can coordinate with the private dam owner and remind them of what their responsibility is for maintaining and updating their structure, especially since it's a higher hazard structure.
Okay, yeah, I guess my question was more about what could go wrong. What is the fear?
So if it's not maintained, there could be a potential breach. If there's degradation of the actual structure itself, the concrete if there's any spalling, if there are any, a lot of times one of the biggest issues is vegetation growing on some of these structures, and they're not maintained. And they just diminish the integrity of the structure. So the point of including it as a hazard mitigation action in this plan is to find out if that private dam owner has had a recent phase 1 done. And if so, in that phase 1 inspection report, we'll have all of the short and long-term actions that need to happen. And it'll also provide what the overall condition of the structure is.
Okay, so if I'm hearing it right, the concern is if the dam were to fail and then the water were to rush through. Okay.
Correct.
All right. And then another question about the insurance, so flood insurance for the different categories. I saw the biggest category is for the X zone.
Yes.
And I thought the X zone meant no flood concern. So I was curious what would spur someone on to have flood insurance in that zone?
So yeah, the X zone is the 500-year flood zone, which has a 0.2% probability of happening in a year. With the increase in the advancement of climate change impacts, a lot of residents and business owners and communities are starting to look at the X zone as the A zone, as the 100-year flood zone. So.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. I see
Yeah. The community can't, the community can't regulate that. It's a federal requirement. But we're seeing it more and more often as we continue to do this type of work, that more and more people who are in the X zone rather than the A zone are also purchasing insurance. And should it become a significant number where there are enough policyholders, I think there's 51 policyholders in the community now. If this was, a community like Situate, Massachusetts, where there were thousands of policies, it would be in the community's best interest to consider joining the community rating system program through the NFIP, which would provide a discount to policyholders with flood insurance, because the loss is so significant and likely probable. But in this situation, it's, the town really hasn't considered community rating system participation yet. One of the reasons is capacity. It's really time intensive and a paperwork trail to get the community enrolled in it. And it's not necessarily cost efficient at this point because there's only 51 policies in the community.
All right, yep, that makes sense. Thank you, Craig.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hi, Trika Harch, Post Court. I'm trying to understand how this document plays along with things like multifamily zoning. Does it impact it? And the question sort of came out of the drought, drought action. If multifamily zoning is sort of requiring a very large increase, requiring is not the right word, it's requiring zoning that could lead to a very large increase in population. How do these things balance?
If I can clarify, you're not referring to multifamily housing, you're referring to the MBTA
Well, yes, MBTA
housing
multifamily
guidelines that
zoning
aren't
requirements.
finalized yet?
Yeah. So will this impact that at all? Does this impact any kind of regulations like that from the state?
So this doesn't necessarily impact that. What would impact that would be your water system supply management plan and where the town's capacity is at. So it's a separate process. It's a separate document. We would hope that once this plan is approved and in place, the hazard mitigation plan is approved and in place, just like we've done with this plan, by looking at all of the other the existing plan studies and reports and carried over their their goals and their strategies and their actions into this plan, that they would in turn take the actions from this plan and carry those to their planning as well. So they would be considering more seriously things like drought. They would be considering more things like flooding and things like that. But it's a very separate process.
There's no questions in the chat, and I don't see anyone in the waiting room, so were there any other questions you're thinking of? No? Okay, I think that is it then, Craig.
Great. Well, again, we have our public comment period open until close of business on Friday, this Friday, on the 17th. The plan is available on the town planning webpage. You can access it there. This is the full plan, including all the appendices and all the mapping. And again, you can email me directly with your questions or with your comments. And I will, once we close that public comment period out, I will present all of those comments to the local hazard mitigation committee for consideration. And then we will update the plan. We will develop the plan review tool, which is the document that FEMA requires that we provide with the draft plan. And the plan will go to MEMA. And once we get MEMA approval, they'll forward it on to FEMA. And once the community gets approval pending adoption from FEMA, the community has 1 year from that date to formally adopt the plan. So thank you all for participating tonight. I appreciate it. And please go on the website and access the plan.